Hi, I'm Jennifer Potter, Executive Director of Be Well Texas. Too many people are struggling alone these days, and alcohol and drug deaths are increasing. We started Be Well Texas to offer high-quality, science-based addiction treatment and recovery services anywhere, even at home. We provide compassionate, caring support virtually or in person. In many cases, there is no cost for treatment if you don't have insurance. Really. Welcome to Be Well Texas. We're glad you're here.
I want to talk about something that's been really exciting around here, and that is our partnership with our friends at Ford. Ford Motor Company and your North Texas Ford, or your Texas Ford dealers have announced an expanded sponsorship of the UIL State Championships, solidifying Ford as the official automotive sponsor of the UIL. As part of the new commitment, Ford will now support all UIL extracurricular activities, including athletic, academic, and music state championship competitions. In addition to the sponsorship, Ford is celebrating the 20th anniversary of the prestigious Built Ford Tough Player of the Week Award and Player of the Year Award. This campaign has become one of the most celebrated in Texas high school sports, recognizing standout athletes, student athletes, for their on-field performance, leadership, and commitment to excellence. Ford will honor some of the most decorated players who have received the award over the years, with a special focus being on their achievements both in high school and beyond. Guys like Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray, all former Built Ford Tough Players of the Year, and we're partnering with them to amplify that. Dave Campbell's Texas Football, we're going to be amplifying the celebration through our partnership through all of our different platforms, so Texan Live, as well as here on this program and over the course of our social media as well, and TexasFootball.com. We're really, really excited to be partnering with Ford to help celebrate all of the things in Texas high school sports across the landscape. So more to come on that. There's more information on TexasFootball.com, but we're so thrilled to announce that partnership in Texas and the Texas Ford Dealers' expanded partnership as the official automotive sponsor of partner of the UIL State Championships. We certainly are very, very excited about the future there.
Hello and welcome into a special edition of the Dave Campbell's College Football Podcast. We got your regulars here. I'm your host, Carter Yates. That is senior college writer Mike Craven. But we are joined today by Sam Conn Jr., senior writer at The Athletic. He is the Techspert at The Athletic, but he's also in a new role covering college football roster management in the transfer portal. And Sam, I want to start there because Craven and I are media dorks, and we like to talk about the business. What led to that change in your role at The Athletic?
Yeah, a few things. I'll start with this. About 3 years ago in 2022, I went to a spring personnel and recruiting clinic in Las Vegas. Geiska Crowley, who's the general manager at Arizona right now, he was the general manager, director of player personnel at UNLV at the time. And there is a national personnel and recruiting symposium that's been held in Nashville for several years, but it was on hiatus after the pandemic kicked off. And so it was kind of absent for a few years. And Geiska Crowley and Lucas Gauthier, who was the director of player personnel at Colorado State, he's no longer in the business at the moment, but he was at Colorado State at the time. Those two kind of put their heads together and, in the absence of the Nashville symposium, decided to do one in Vegas. And so they did one for a couple of years. I had gotten interested in it and was just curious about it. And especially once I started seeing guys from the state of Texas on personnel staffs that I knew were going there. And so I asked, hey, can I come? And they were gracious. They let me come along. And I spent a couple days there in Vegas listening to about 100 personnel people from the Power Four, Group of Five, FCS across the levels talk about what was going on in the sport, the different challenges they were facing, and it really opened my eyes to what this world was. And I think how much even me, who's been covering college football for more than a decade, even I didn't understand how deep some of this went and how important some of these issues were. And so I started gaining a natural interest in it. And have known a lot of the personnel people, GMs and directors of player personnel in the state of Texas. And so I just kind of started naturally gravitating toward that. And then last year, Max Olson, my good friend, who I've worked with for a long, long time, both at ESPN and at The Athletic, he left. He had been kind of covering the portal and a lot of the roster management for us at The Athletic. He left last summer to go back to ESPN. And so we had a void to fill, and we knew we needed somebody in that role. And so I kind of raised my hand last summer when we were having some staff meetings, and I said, hey, I would be interested in doing this because I just had a natural interest in it just from my networking and doing research and talking to people in this industry. It just fascinated me that how much of the sport lived in the off season in almost the way that recruiting did 15 years ago. If you guys remember when Rivals was at its peak, 247 was launching, Scout.com was still around. The recruiting coverage at that time was rising, and the fans were super into it. And I started to feel like maybe this is kind of that in a different way 15 years later, with obviously the transfer portal being your de facto free agency in college football. And so I raised my hand and asked that, hey, can I still cover Texas college football, but can I make this my new role? And they went for it. Fortunately, they also gave me some help. We have a couple other folks on our staff, Antonio Morales, Manny Navarro, Grace Trainer, who are also doing this. So we now have a college football roster management team that has joined me. And so it's given us some resources to really work. And 3 months into this, I've loved it. I wish I had done it sooner. It's been a really eye-opening experience to listen and talk to directors of player personnel, general managers, scouting directors, NIL collective heads, administrators who are, of course, leading the efforts at their schools, agents. You got to talk to the agents. Everybody, there's so many people in this world. There's so many ways to get information, and it really keeps you connected to the sport at all levels, not just at the top 25 or the Power 4, but all the way down to the G5, the FCS, and even Division II, because players can come from anywhere. And so I've really enjoyed that experience, and it's been a fun one so far in the first few months of me being on it.
What's the biggest complaint right now behind the scenes when you're talking to these coaches, you're talking to the agents, you're talking to the collectives? Kind of what is the thing that they want to change in the upcoming years?
I think two things. The calendar is probably one of the biggest ones, is how you have the portal open during the season when it's still going on. Obviously, it's the postseason, but there's still a lot of teams playing bowl games and playoff games. And the fact that opens during that process has been a real headache for a lot of people. The other part is the fact that there's two portal windows. There's a constant need to maintain the roster and monitor the roster even after you've done the bulk of your roster movement in the winter, because you will have signed your high school class in early December. You will have gotten your transfer class mostly in by January, maybe February in some exceptions, but most of it. But then when spring football comes, then the portal opens again after that. Then you have a whole nother round of, we've got to renegotiate a deal with this guy, or we're going to lose these few guys. And there are some coaches who do find that helpful, especially first-year coach. I talked to a first-year head coach who said, hey, if I didn't have the spring portal, I don't know how much of a roster I would have because of how much he lost when he took the job and how many guys he had to go get in the spring. But I think by and large, the majority of the coaches and personnel people and everyone I talk to would like there to be one portal window, just so that there is a little bit more order when it comes to maintaining a roster. College football is the only college sport that has two portal windows. Every other sport has one. And I think that to me has probably been those two things, the calendar and the two portal windows, probably been the biggest complaint.
I listened to you on Sikkim 365, and you talked about how double transfers, like it used to be where you transfer one time and that's it. You got to sit out a year. They're not going to put the genie back in the bottle and go back to that system. But is there a feasible path to only one transfer portal window, like only a winter window or only a spring window? How could they get back to that?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I don't think it's going to be as hard as people think it is. I know there's a lot of people who assume that if they go to one transfer portal window, there will be lawsuits, and there may be. But I think because every other sport in college athletics has one transfer portal window, I do think they have a decent amount of chance of succeeding and going down to one, as long as it is viewed as giving everyone a fair opportunity to get in enough time to get in and be able to make those decisions. But I think one portal window is possible. It's feasible. Now, will it be done in the current setup, or will we have to get further down the line in terms of collective bargaining and things of this sort, or some kind of national legislation? I don't know the answer to that, but I do think at some point, just because it's done in every other sport, even in the pro sports, there's one free agency period in the NFL. So, I mean, to me, it's common sense, and I do think it's feasible. It's just a matter of figuring out when the timing is going to be. Is it going to be in the winter, or is it going to be in the spring? And I think you hear different feedback from people on when that should be.
When I talk to coaches and when I talk to administrators, it feels like half of them think the salary cap, kind of $13 to $17 million, is going to make the sport a little bit more even. And half of them kind of laugh at that idea and go, people have been figuring out ways to spend more money than other schools forever. That's not going to stop. Where do you kind of sit with how the roster and the amount of money you're allowed to spend kind of gets, if it's going to be equal across the board, or if we continue to see the haves and the have-nots, even at the P4?
I mean, I think you're always going to have the have and the have-nots, because that's the story of college football, right? The Alabama is in a different place from Rice. Okay, so let's be honest about that. I think a lot of people are talking about busting the salary cap and going over the cap to spend money. I think that's going to be a small problem that's only involves a certain number of schools. And when I say that, I mean your 15 to 20 schools that may be able to compete for a national championship. You want to know why? Because most of the other schools can't afford to even spend at the full cap at this point. So I think most teams are going to abide by the cap because they just don't have the finances to fully fund a roster across athletics that's going to spend more than $22 million. But your Ohio State, your Texases, your Oregons, your Georgias, your teams that are competing at the highest level, will they try to find a way around it? Possibly. And I think it's just like the history of college sports. When you think about when rules change or things happen, the moment someone does something or the moment someone believes that the other school is doing something, their competitors are doing something that they are not, then they're going to try to do the same thing. And if that means bending the rules, then so be it. So I do think there is going to be an issue, but I think it's going to be very concentrated within the schools that can financially afford to do it. But your Iowa States, your Kansas States, and certainly anybody in your G5 level, nobody else is going to go over the cap, I don't suspect, because they're already having a hard enough time trying to find the money to do it now.
Yeah.
And the conversations about revenue sharing and the cap, what confuses me is NIL collectives' place in the new world of college football. So we've lived in an era now where players are getting paid through NIL collectives. Now it's the school doing it directly. Are there still going to be NIL collectives, or is it all revenue sharing now for college athletics?
That's a fascinating one. I think most of it's going to be revenue sharing, but when you talk to people, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I've talked to some people. I talked to somebody over this weekend who told me our collective's going to shut down, essentially for most of the sports. And there's some cases where they're going to bring the collective in-house and essentially mold it into the alumni fundraising athletics arm, so to speak. And then there's some who are, I believe, hoping to hold on to it as a way to circumvent the cap. Is say, hey, I talked to someone who runs NIL at a Power 4 school earlier this summer, and he said, we're going to keep ours just in case, because if this starts going where people are circumventing it, we need to be able to mobilize quickly, and we need to be able to get things done and get the players we need to get, even if it's going beyond that cap. So I think it's going to be a mixed bag, and that's where the enforcement arm and how these deals are reviewed and what the process is and how willing schools are to abide by these rules. They're saying it's one thing to say right now, we're going to follow the rules, but what does it look like in practice? What does it look like when you're this close to getting the 5-star you need, or you're this close to getting the transfer you need, and you just need that little extra and you got to figure out a way. I'm curious to see. It's going to take time to see how this really plays out. But I think most administrators you talk to would like their collectives to sunset and would like them to just shut down and go revenue share and true NIL, meaning what's the company that Arch did this shorts commercial for, Viore or whatever, or Lamborghini or Dr. Pepper, or whatever actual brand gets you for an NIL deal in the what's supposed to be the true NIL deal. I think their hope is that it's going to be mostly revenue share, and then anything outside of that is a true NIL deal with a real brand, with a real deliverable, and in the way that the rule was intended when it was brought up in 2021.
Well, I'm blanking on the person who wrote the story, but it was almost like the return of the bagman coming back.
Justin Williams, my colleague. Yeah, we talked about that one a lot. Yeah.
Justin Williams. So now the return of the bagman, except the bagman is now a Dr. Pepper sales rep.
Yeah, and I think I've had that conversation with people in personnel as well. If the enforcement arm works and if people say they're going to abide by the rules, let's be honest, there's always been schools and there's always been people who are willing to go the extra mile to get the player. So could we get back to, I've even asked, can we get back to delivering bags of cash to players? I wouldn't rule it out. I don't know if we're going to, but look, the bottom line is these are multi-million-dollar industries with a lot of pressure from boosters, donors, and everyone else to win at the highest level, headed by head coaches who are getting 7 and sometimes 8-figure salaries. That pressure is going to bust pipes, and more often than not, if you are at that level that's trying to compete to win a championship, chances are you're going to try to find a way around the rules to some degree. So could we have an old school bagman like we had 15 years ago? Sure, I think it's possible.
I think the one deterrent to the bagman theory is back in the day, $20,000 in a brown paper bag was a lot of money.
Yes.
Now that's not much money to some of these guys, right?
No.
So like you're going to have to bagman $500K.
Yeah, and that's a challenge. I was talking to somebody earlier this year who said, "Man, we got a defensive lineman, like a power 4 defensive lineman, back 7-8 years ago for $30,000." He goes, "You could not get a starting power 4 defensive lineman for $30,000.
Can't get him on a visit for $30,000.
No, it's going to be like $400 to get to get him talking." And so that is true, and that is where I think some of the leadership has hope and optimism that this enforcement arm and the clearinghouse is actually going to work, because trying to do that at that level with the money that these players are commanding is really hard to sustain. Yeah. But again, roster management is tricky because you guys mentioned, so if the cap is 21 million right now and it's for the whole department, and only 18 million of that is actual direct player payment because you're taking off $2.5 million for salaries. I mean, for scholarships. Well, then let's say 75% is going to football. You're still talking, what's that, 15 million? So let's say you spend $1 million on a quarterback, and let's say you got a couple defensive tackles, and those are $500,000-600,000, and you got an edge rusher for $400,000-500,000. Oh, and you got an elite receiver for $700,000 and a tight end for $600,000. Guess what? We've eaten up a third of the budget already with 5 players, and you've got 75 more players to account for. So that is where this becomes fascinating, because like a power 4 starting quarterback, the baseline is $1 million in most cases. And when you get around to the premium positions, after you get that, then everyone else has to fall in line. So it's going to provide an interesting challenge to schools on how they budget, how they allocate what they do to the roster. I think you're going to see a lot of people doing it like the NFL, where quarterback, offensive tackle, edge rusher, defensive tackle, those are going to be your premium positions that are get the most money. And then after that, it'll kind of trickle down. But what happens when you run out of money, or what happens when you don't have it in the budget to go get the portal guy you want? And also, does that help your mid-tier power 5s or your group of 5s who are not spending at the cap, or who are not blowing the door open for a big-time star? Maybe they have a little bit more money, and maybe they have a little bit more love to give you if you're a rotational player at a Georgia versus being a starter and a potential star at an Iowa State.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question to you, is how do you think they allocate these funds? The top 30 players on the roster get it all, and then the rest just kind of get crumbs? Do they spread it out? I guess that's probably case by case.
Yeah, I think it's going to be case by case, but I think let's keep in mind there's a 85-man scholarship limit, or I'm sorry, not a limit, 105-man scholarship limit, but most programs are going to stay at 85 scholarships. And most coaches you talk to will tell you, you can't even it's hard to get 85 people on the field. So you're not going to pay 70 through 85 at the same rate that you're going to pay everyone else, because also when you travel for a road game, your travel roster is 7. So you're looking at really, okay, your top 70 is going to get what's going to get the most, but really it's going to be your 2 deep. So I would say 50. You're probably going to look at maybe almost like an NFL model. Somewhere 45 to 55 players are going to get the bulk. Your quarterback's going to probably be your highest paid player in most cases. Your defensive tackles, your edge rushers are going to get a lot. Your offensive tackles are going to get a lot. And then after that, it's going to be a case by case, depending on what scheme they run, what that coach and what that system prioritizes, and what you feel like you need from a depth standpoint. But I do think those are the positions, like I said, just like in the NFL, if you follow how contracts are done in the NFL and which players get paid the most, that's going to be largely the model I think you're going to follow. I've seen GMs show me, hey, look, this is how we're going to allocate. Like they've done a lot of these a lot of these college football GMs have spent time and studied with NFL GMs, like, hey, how do you do yours? We're going to try to replicate that because the value is going to be similar. There's going to be some differences. I will say, for instance, I see running backs probably get a little bit more valued in college football than I do in the NFL. The NFL, it seems like they've tamped down the value a little bit. In college football, a great running back, even if he's not carrying the ball 20, 25 times a game, I think is still pretty valued. But I think you're going to see a very similar way that it plays out to the NFL. But you're going to see exceptions where if you're Eric Singleton and you're in the portal, you're the top receiver in the portal, someone's going to pay a premium for you because you are an elite player. And so it doesn't matter what position you are. If you are an elite player, if you're an elite edge rusher, or you're an elite receiver, or you're an elite running back, you're going to get more than what the market value, quote unquote, is for your position.
Sam, right before we started recording, news broke that the Pac-12 and CBS Sports have signed a new 5-year media rights agreement through the 2031 season, 2030-31 season, I should say. We've heard a lot about Texas State and rumors about the Pac-12. How does this impact a potential Texas State going to the Pac-12 scenario?
Yeah, I mean, having the TV deal that's the bird in the hand, right? You need, in order for a conference to succeed and be viable, you have to have a solid television deal. You have to have the exposure. You have to have the constant, predictable revenue stream that it brings in. And if you're Texas State, you get to now tangibly look, how does that compare to our current deal right now that we have in the Sun Belt? Because regardless of what anybody says about realignment, number one is always money. And so it's what can we do from a revenue stream standpoint, especially in this era where now you're having directly compensated athletes. You've got to maximize the revenue in any way possible. So if that deal is better than what Texas State has, and they look at all these other factors of the branding of the Pac-12 and some of the other programs they're associated with, if that's all a positive, then it's a positive step for you, and you go ahead and take that and make that jump. Obviously, it's not a geography fit, but very rarely are these days geography is being taken into account in realignment, which drives me nuts, but that's where we are. So they're all television partnerships, essentially, is what it is. It's a television package to sell. So I'll be curious to see how it goes and what kind of fit Texas State is if they indeed make the move. But it's intriguing. And I will say this, as good a footing as the Sun Belt is on, I've never felt like Texas State is a natural fit in that conference because they're alone in the state. The closest other schools in that conference are in Arkansas and Louisiana. And so there's not a lot of real natural rivalry, so to speak. I always thought, and this is just me wanting to keep all the Texas schools together, I always thought they'd be a better fit in the American, but that, I don't know how or why that would happen or how you would get to that place because you'd be in there with UTSA and Rice and North Texas and some of those schools. But that's a conversation for another day. I think their bottom line is, hey, how do we maximize revenue? And if the Pac-12 can do that with this new TV deal, then I feel like it's a no-brainer.
I'm fascinated by the hierarchy in the state and how it's been upended because of NIL and transfer portal and everything. And it felt like for a long time, like Texas and Texas A&M are obviously still the top 2 jobs in the state and have been for a long time. I think there's an argument to be made that like number 3 is up in the air and we don't really know who's going to become that 3rd best job in the state. Like who do you think emerges as like that next kind of like power, that next tier in Texas?
So it's fascinating because 3 years ago you had asked me, I would have told you Baylor or TCU.
Right.
Because TCU had just come off a title, but also they had played consistently for conference championships. Obviously in the Gary Patterson era, we're well aware of what was accomplished there, but also location. Fort Worth's a great location. They seem to have a really good donor base that is, so many renovations and things that they do, they're able to pay for, which you can't say for every school, that has to go into debt service. Baylor, obviously winning 3 conference titles since the last 12, 13 years. So that's a plus for them. They're a program that's probably been the most resilient, it seems like. Even last year when they were kind of on the brink, now all of a sudden they finished the season strong. Now it looks like, okay, they may be the breakout team this year in the Big 12. But right now in the current era in 2025, looking forward, you take everything into account and what it takes to build a championship team and to build a roster, I have to think it's Texas Tech, because even though the location isn't as ideal as maybe a place like Fort Worth, they got the money, they got the donors, they got the want to. You see what they're doing at softball, what they're doing in basketball, and we know what they've done in football in this winter transfer portal. And they spent over $10 million on the portal class alone. They're going to have a roster that's probably over $20 million, which is probably going to surpass what Ohio State had last year, what Ohio State spent on its championship roster to win the title. So when you have that type of support and you have a stable administration, which they have right now, even though, and it's crazy to say it because they haven't won 9 games since Mike Leach was the head coach in 2009. So we're talking 16 years since they even won and had a 9-win season. But when you have the firepower financially to go do what you need to do from a facility standpoint, infrastructure, and then get players, which is the number one thing, because you cannot win without players. I think if you were a Power 4 coaching candidate and you were picking between one of those 3 jobs, you could take any of them. But I think the one that gives you the most chance today is Texas Tech.
Do you think that's true? Do you think that they can do that in high school recruiting? Like getting a junior and senior to come to Lubbock for a big contract to play for a year or two and audition for the NFL seems like an easier proposition than getting the 18-year-old. Like TCU has still signed, like the 3rd best class in the state's been TCU 2 out of the last 3 years, including like this past cycle. Do you think Texas Tech can become a high school recruiting power to like build that year over year? Because it does feel like transfer portal is pretty volatile still to build a roster that way.
That part is harder for a few reasons. Number one, you need proof of concept. So that makes this season for Tech vital. Like they have to either go play for a Big 12 championship or win it and get to the playoff to show recruits, hey, you can go win here. Because right now, TCU can still tell you, hey, we played for the national championship 3 years ago. Like that's not that long ago. And these kids who are getting recruited now will remember that because they're 17 now. They were 14 then. So they probably watched that game. Granted, they watched them get their ass kicked by Georgia, but regardless,
so maybe just talk the semifinal.
They got exactly, but they got there. They beat Michigan. They went undefeated all the way up until that point, or up until the Big 12 championship. So everybody remembers that. So you can sell that. Baylor won a conference championship in 2021. Again, not that long ago, with the current head coach, with Dave Aranda. So you can sell that. Tech doesn't have that success to sell. They are better right now than they have been historically in the post-Leach era. Like the 3-year stretch that Jordan McGuire's had, is better than any 3-year stretch that any coach has had post Mike Leach. So you can sell that. But when you see players picking a program like a Texas, that's because guess what? They not only do they have the financial backing, but they went to the playoff, they went to the semifinals, played for the Final Four. So number one is winning. Number two, location does play into it. It's a lot easier to recruit if you're in Dallas-Fort Worth and you're a driving distance from all these recruits than it is if you're in Lubbock, where it's about, let's say you're in DFW, it's about a 5-hour drive to get there. Or if you're in Austin, it's a 6-hour, or maybe you got to get on a plane. If you're in Houston, you certainly got to get on a plane. So that part is going to be harder to do if you're Texas Tech, because as cool a town as Lubbock is, it's still far away from where a lot of the players are. Mm-hmm. So at least the concentration of big time recruits in the state. So that part makes it a little more difficult. The other thing I would say is I get the feeling, and you're right, the transfer portal is volatile, but I get the feeling that programs are not going to break the bank by and large for high school recruits unless you are recruiting a top top 300, like a 5-star, top 100, maybe even a top 300 type recruit, because the guy can be gone in a year. And I know that's the case for the transfer portal, but in the portal, at least you're paying for a guy who probably has college snaps and who's grown and developed physically, and you a little bit know what you're getting. At the high school level, you're projecting a 17-year-old and what he might look like in 2 years. So committing a lot of money to that guy can be a little tricky, because we've seen how many guys over the years bust out that are big time recruits that didn't end up panning out. I think you're going to, and that's part of the fascinating balance between this, is when you build your roster portal versus high school, it's always going to be a mix. And I think your championship teams are still always going to build largely through high school. Your Georgias, your Ohio State, your Texas, etc. They're going to build largely through high school. But everyone else, you've got to make the calculation. Does this defensive tackle who's 260 pounds and he's 17 years old, do I want to take him, or do I want to take the average power 4 who's already 295 and has already been in a college weight program and I know can get me snaps and play today? And that's where I think it's going to be fascinating to see how these programs balance that. So if you're at Texas Tech, is the caliber recruit you can get right now today, is that better than what you can get in the portal? I don't know. But if you win the Big 12, then you start being able to attract more guys of that higher level, and you can start spending some more money on them and taking a little bit more of a risk, because you're going to get a higher level of guy.
Now, we've mentioned the 3 Big 12 schools as potentially the 3rd best job in Texas, but there's an ACC school, SMU, that I think deserves at least a mention here. In the heart of Dallas, we had Billy Embody on the show. I don't know if it'll air by the time we post this one, but he was talking about the recruiting battles. They took Ty Hawkins, TCU commit, now going to SMU. They've won battles against Oklahoma. Where does SMU fit in this pantheon of best jobs in the state?
Yeah, I think they're in the conversation, certainly, and they wouldn't have been a few years ago. But obviously, going to the ACC helps out a whole lot. Playing for an ACC championship helps out a whole lot. Winning conference championships right before they got there, that helps a whole lot. So they are in that conversation. And they also, like Texas Tech, do not lack for donors and do not lack for money. They have paid their way essentially into the ACC, which still is mind-boggling to me when you think about what they're forfeiting from a rights standpoint. But that's
just $100 million. Not going to lose any sleep over that, Sam.
Seriously. God, I wish I were Bill Armstrong.
Yeah.
So I would say they have the institutional want to, in the same way that Texas Tech does, maybe more so, because we know their history and we know they've been willing to do whatever it takes to get it done. They've got a really good head coach. Oh, by the way, they've been recruiting at a high level, and they're in the heart of Dallas, Fort Worth. They're right there where all the players are. They are, like Carter said, the proof's in the pudding from a recruiting standpoint. So that's a fascinating one. Is like, if you were a Power 4 coaching candidate, would you take one of those other 3 jobs we mentioned, or would you take SMU? I think SMU has an argument. They're a little bit behind from a stadium standpoint. Obviously, I know they did the end zone facility, but the stadium's probably, you're still like a little bit not sure, but they're in a nice part of town. It's a big city. You have access to everything. And they've already are showing that they can win at the Power 4 level. And they go back this year and go back to the ACC title game and get back to the playoff, just like they did last year, which is very much in the cards. When you look at what they bring back, especially having Kevin Jennings back, I know they got to replace a lot on the skill positions, but I still think they have a lot of talent. I think they still have a good infrastructure. They've got stability at the coordinators. I think they have a lot going for them. And so if they can continue to build on that momentum, they're right there in that conversation with Tech, TCU, and Baylor without question.
Yeah, I think if there's a team that's going to dethrone TCU, it's SMU. And I think the reason TCU is going to take a step back if they do is because of SMU. Like they're no longer the one show in town. Do you think the ACC kind of volatility or like the uncertainty of what it is in 5 years hurts them? And like, where is this thing headed? Like where are we going in 2030, 2031 in terms of like just what this sport looks like?
Super League.
That's a loaded question. Yeah. Gosh, I hope not. I don't want to see that, but who knows? That's the thing, is all these TV deals are going to wrap up right around then, with the exception of the ACC. But Even theirs is, that once things start moving, we know how this goes.
Yeah, and the
So-
buyout to get out drops around that time.
Right. So I don't know what it looks like. Does that volatility hurt SMU? Of course it does. I mean, it's just like the position all the legacy Big 12 schools were in when Texas and Oklahoma left. You're very vulnerable. There's not much you can do about that except just hope that your teams win and succeed in the playoff. But look, we've ceded the power in this sport to two gentlemen for the most part. Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner, and Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner. And I think the sport's going to regret that in the long run, because those guys only have the best interests of their schools, not the best interests of the entire sport in mind. And I mean, Sankey pretty much, I think he alluded to that when he was at SEC spring meetings about, the need to service his coaches and his schools. It's unfortunate that we're here, but that's where we are. And I know everybody says, oh, he should get a commissioner and all that. I don't think we'll ever get to that point. I don't, unless we get to a point where there actually is collective bargaining, which I think that is also going to take a long way to get to, even though I think that's the solution to a lot of the problems in the sport, is just recognize them as employees and collectively bargain, just like every other pro sport does. I think it's going to be hard to get one central power figure over this thing. And so as long as that's the case, it's going to be the individual conference commissioners wielding the power, and the two in the most powerful conferences are going to wield most of it. And they've already codified it into the playoff. They've already codified it into the revenue that they get more than everyone else. And so as long as that happens, what the future looks like is going to be in their hands. And is there a chance that we could see a super league, so to speak, where you have just the top programs in those conferences and maybe a handful of others? Yeah, I could see it. I think it would be disastrous for the sport. The sport will never die, in my opinion, but you would get closer to death in that way than any other instance, in my opinion. Whereas if we tried to figure out what we have now and try to, even as disjointed as the conferences are and as crazy as, where we are from a revenue standpoint and all that, I still think you can salvage some of this if we don't go down the road of, let's give this conference multiple bids in the playoff and let's keep stacking the deck financially for these other conferences. But I will say I have my healthy dose of skepticism that we'll ever get to that. And so to your question, Carter, about that round in 2030, 2031, every school that's TCU or SMU or that's in the upper tier of their conferences in the Power Four, Texas Tech, they're not in the upper tier, but they're financially are. They're all going to be looking for that same life raft, that same lifeboat. They want to be included in the next round of whatever college football is, or whatever college athletics looks like. They want to be in that elite class, and they're going to do whatever they got to do to get in it. We've already seen SMU prove that they'll do whatever it takes. And so that's what's going to happen is in 2030, 2031, but probably a couple years before that, when things really start moving, you're going to see schools are going to go and do whatever they can to make sure they are included in whatever that next level is, if they deem they can afford it and they need to be part of it. And there's going to be some that are going to check out. There's going to be some that are going to say, you know what, we don't need this. This is not what we're for. And because I think there is a lot more who are not willing to do it than we realize.
Yeah, I mean, the conversations I've had out in West Texas are that, right? Like, we're putting the money into these facilities. We're putting the money into this roster. Like, we're going to prove that you cannot leave us behind. I know a program near and dear to your heart that's kind of in that in-between stage right now is Houston. Kind of what do you see from the Cougars? Can they kind of catch up to the Big 12 elite in terms of money spending wise? Like, what do you see for their football program?
It's going to be a real uphill battle for them because they have just been so far behind financially because of being left out. They don't have the donor base that SMU has. They don't have the high-level donors that Texas Tech has, or even the depth of donors that TCU has. They do not have that, have not had that. You're probably looking at a dozen, 10 to 12, I think, high-level donors. I know a lot of people talk about Tomer Fertitta. He lent his name and $20 million to that basketball arena, and he has done some things, but I don't think he has not been to University of Houston what Cody Campbell has been to Texas Tech, so to speak, or what Bill Armstrong has been to SMU, at least in the NIL era. And so they're still playing catch up because they have one of the largest subsidies for their athletics budget of any school in the country. They're just now this coming year going to be a full share member of the Big 12. So they've been just like BYU and Cincinnati and UCF. They've been on the, getting essentially less than half of the media rights those first 2 years as they phase in. That'll help. That'll help a lot. The coaching staff and what they have from a football staff standpoint, I have a lot of confidence in. I think Willie Fritz is one of the better coaches in the country. And I think when you see what he has done at multiple levels, he's won at every level from JUCO all the way up that he's coached at. So I think he will get them there. But when push comes to shove, can they get the players they need? I thought they did pretty well in the portal, but they're, for now or for the foreseeable future, they're going to be a portal team on a budget. They're not going to be able to go splash the pot and go get the high-level transfers, impact guys that you can get, that any other school, Power 4 school can get. They're going to have to be smart about what they do and get some of the under-radar guys, some of the guys maybe you don't know, but then they'll turn out to be players. They're going to have to hit on a lot of those guys. But then you look at the high school recruiting. Again, we talk about location with TCU and SMU. Houston, location is ideal, and you look at the 2026 class where they're doing really, really well. And they've got Keyshawn Henderson, that quarterback who just showed out at the Elite 11. They've got 6 more months to try to hold on to him. I don't know if they can, but if they can, boy, that is a huge boost in the way that Ed Oliver was that boost 10 years ago. Ed Oliver in that H-Town takeover class of 2016 really helped boost Houston and put them in the national conversation to a certain degree. If Keyshawn Henderson can do that for them with Willie Fritz, and then if they can get to a bowl game this year and start taking some steps forward, then you can start talking about, okay, they can contend for something in the Big 12. Because I do think Houston, to me, has always been a program that has a lot of potential because of its location, because of its proximity to recruits, and because you can just get players there. We've seen some really good Houston teams over the years. If you can hang on to a coach and have some stability on that front and develop guys, then you've got a chance. But there's going to be a natural ceiling. As long as we're in this era where you've got to pay to play, there's going to be a natural ceiling for them because they just do not have that donor base. So I think the future, I would say cautiously optimistic is what I am for Houston. I don't think I see them as a team that's going to win the Big 12 in 2 or 3 years, but I think they're a team that can get in that conversation, compete. Iowa State, for instance, is a team that you see that competes for Big 12 championships now. They are also a program that does not have the kind of flush funds that other programs have, but they've done it through coaching, development, recruiting, and retention. That's the way Houston's going to have to do it.
Yeah. And if everybody's overspending in the transfer portal and not in high school recruiting, maybe that gives them a little bit of an edge there. That makes sense. Yeah.
Well, the future is scary, I think, for a lot of college football teams. So let's keep it to 2025 on the field before we get you out of here, Sam. Craven just came out with a story saying the G5 in Texas is a 3-team race. It's North Texas, it's Texas State, it's UTSA. Of those 3 teams, who would you put down your money to win their conference?
I think I still stick with UTSA. I love what they did the second half of last season after they looked dead on arrival at the start of the year. I thought that was one of the best coaching jobs that Jeff Traylor and his staff have done, is to get that team from where they were to where they ended the season. I'm a huge Owen McCown fan. I thought when you saw him early, I thought he looked maybe a little deer in the headlights. And then by the end of the season, you saw, wow, this guy looked like he's got it figured out. I thought they are another team. You talk about people who've done well in the portal. I think they've done a great job in the portal and also have developed some of their guys that some of those sleeper type recruits that they've nailed over the years. You're starting to see those guys really start to blossom now. So I don't know that I would pick them to win their conference at this point. I still think there's some other teams in there in that league that I would feel better about. But of those 3 teams that I think have the best shot, I think I still give it to UTSA.
Any thoughts on Texas A&M and what their ceiling is with Marcel Reed this year? Did they break the 8-4 ceiling that they got?
I don't expect them to be an SEC title contender by any stretch. I do expect them to be better. I think in year 2, having Marcel Reed as the day one guy, going into the offseason knowing he's the guy, and having a year in Colin Klein's offense, I think he fits it really well. He certainly fit it better than what Connor Wigman did. That offense wasn't a real great fit for Connor Wigman's skill set. So going in day one as the guy, I think he really can make a difference. He's a great athlete. You watch him take off with the ball, and it's just different. So that gives you a chance because you're going to be held to do in the run game. They're bringing back a lot in the backfield. You got Marcel Reed. They did a great job of loading up in the portal at receiver. So I love what they did from that standpoint. Your Mario Cravers, your Casey Concepciones, they did a good job of stacking that room, and they needed it because you guys, Mike, you were there with me, I think, for the Notre Dame game and the Texas game. Their guys couldn't get open. And that, as much as people want to put things on the quarterback, if your guys can't get open, there's not a lot you can do. Those receivers were not winning at a consistent enough clip, and now they brought in some dynamic talent. They got the 5-star recruit as well. So you've got enough dynamic talent there. I think you can make some things happen in the receiver game. So I think they'll be better. I don't anticipate a SEC title game. I think they can be in the conversation in November like they were last year, but I look at them as probably a 9-3 type team. I think they'll be take a steady step forward, and Mike Elko is going to continue to build this program. It's going to be a slower burn. It's not going to be like Jimbo Fisher. We're going to go sign all these 5-star recruits and then see what we can do. I think it's going to take some time, and I think that's probably the right approach for a Texas A&M program that struggled to win at the level that they feel like they should. They haven't won a conference title since 1998. I think it's fair to be patient and try to gradually develop this thing over time to get them to where they want to be.
Well, I heard Craven's baby crying in the background. I think that's our timer. Sam Kahn.
No, it was my dog. We live near a fire station, and every time a fire truck goes by, Taco howls like he's some kind of wolf. So that's what that was.
My dog does that too. It's happened when we go pick up our kid at the elementary school driver pickup line. You hear the fire truck go by, and he's back there howling.
No, between the dog howling, the baby crying, the Craven household, something else right now, my man. Something else. I know you get it. So
yep.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for joining us again. Y'all, you can find him at The Athletic. He's a senior writer covering college football roster management and the transfer portal. And as always, the Techspert. Sam, we look forward to the 2025 season, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.